Break through the white noise and see the world through a prism of intense color and raw, unfiltered emotion. We show you every shade of the human experience through stunning 3D cinematic visuals. Click subscribe now and start seeing the world in a whole new light.
Email came through at 6:47 in the morning while I was still in my scrubs from a 12-hour overnight shift. I had flour on my sleeve from the break room, someone's birthday cake, a lukewarm coffee going cold in my hand, and 73 unread messages in my inbox. The one that mattered was from Continental Title Group, flagged urgent, subject line, cosigner verification required, loan file, number C22291. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't understand it. I understood it perfectly. I stared at it because 3 weeks earlier, I had already told my brother I was done. Let me back up, because if I start with the email, you won't understand why I felt nothing when I read it. Not satisfaction, not guilt, not even that low hum of I told you so that I used to feel back when I still believed things would eventually make sense between us. By the time that email arrived, I had already cried the last cry I was going to cry over Holden. I had already sat alone in my car in the hospital parking garage and said out loud to nobody, "You don't owe him anything more." But to explain why I was in that parking garage talking to myself at midnight, I have to go back further. About 4 years further. Our mom died in the spring when I was 27. Holden was 23. He had just dropped out of his second attempt at community college, was living in her basement, and didn't have a dollar to his name. I had a steady income, a studio apartment across town, and a nursing license I had worked myself into the ground to get. Mom didn't leave much. The house went to pay off the reverse mortgage she'd taken out 2 years before she got sick. There was a small life insurance payout, not small to us, but nothing that was going to change anyone's life permanently. She split it evenly between us in the will. But before she died, in one of those conversations that live rent-free in your brain forever, she took my hand and said, "Watch out for your brother." She said it the way she used to say it when we were kids, and she was dropping us off at school. Like it was just a thing that was understood. Like it had always been my job and always would be. I nodded. Of course I nodded. She was dying. I didn't know then that Holden had already been telling people I promised to take care of him, financially, indefinitely. That he had built his entire next chapter around my income as a structural element. I found that out slowly. The way you find out most things that are quietly devastating. Not in one conversation, but across 20 small ones, each one a little more revealing than the last. The first 2 years, it wasn't terrible. I helped when I could. I covered his phone bill for a stretch when he was between jobs. I let him borrow my car for 3 weeks when his transmission died, even though I worked nights and had to take the bus. When he got a job at a sporting goods warehouse, I bought him work boots without being asked because I saw his old ones were worn through. I did those things because he was my brother and I loved him, and because I still heard Mom's voice when I looked at him. Then he met Amber. Amber came into his life about 18 months after Mom passed. And I want to be fair here, because when I first met her, I thought she was fine. She was pretty, competent, had opinions about everything. She worked at a marketing firm, wore expensive-looking clothes, and laughed a lot. Holden seemed happy. I was genuinely glad for him. The first sign I should have paid more attention to was at a dinner about 2 months in. The 4 of us, Holden, Amber, my friend Renata, and me, went to a Thai place for Holden's birthday. When the check came, Amber said very brightly, "Oh, since you're the one with the real salary, you should probably just get this, right?" And then she laughed like she'd made a joke. I paid it. I let it be a joke. That was my mistake. Within 6 months of Holden and Amber getting together, a version of me had been constructed that I didn't fully recognize. In their telling, I was a successful woman with money to spare. I was the sister who, of course, helped. I was the one who wanted to support Holden's future. Amber had very specific ideas about that future. She wanted a house, not a starter home, not a modest place in a decent neighborhood. She had sent me a Zillow listing once, unprompted, for a 4-bedroom new construction in a development called Clearwater Ridge. The base price was $487,000. She had written in the text below it, "Isn't this gorgeous? Could you imagine?" I didn't respond to that one. Then one evening, Holden called and asked if we could talk. He came over, sat at my kitchen table with the careful energy of someone who has rehearsed, and laid it out. They wanted to buy a home together. They'd found a builder offering custom builds in that same development. The base model was $440,000. They could qualify on their own incomes for something smaller. but for the home they wanted, the one with the upgraded kitchen, the main floor primary suite, the 3-car garage, they needed a cosigner. They needed me. I felt the floor shift a little under me. Not because I was surprised exactly, more because I suddenly saw the shape of something I had been in the middle of without knowing it. I asked what the cosigning would mean for me practically. Holden gave me a number that had clearly been prepared. I asked what happened if they couldn't make payments. He said that wouldn't happen. I asked again. He said, "Come on, you know I'm good for it." I didn't say yes that night. I said I needed to think. What happened next was a masterclass in pressure I couldn't fully name at the time. Amber texted me a photo of the floor plan. Then she texted me a photo of a kitchen finish she loved with the caption, "This is the dream, right?" Holden called twice in 1 week. Not to talk, just to say he was so excited and he really hoped this worked out. My aunt, who I hadn't spoken to in 8 months, called to say she'd heard the news and that it would mean so much to the family if I could help Holden settle down. My aunt had been briefed. That's when I understood. I still said yes. God help me, I said yes. I heard Mom's voice and I signed the paperwork. The build was supposed to take 9 months. It took 14. I would like to tell you that 14 months of watching that house go up were uneventful, but I would be lying. At month 2, Amber decided the standard backsplash was unacceptable and wanted the custom tile that cost $4,000 more. She texted me the quote with a "Can you believe this is only $4, Katie? For something that will last forever?" I did not offer to pay for it. She brought it up again in a phone call with Holden, where I could hear her in the background saying it's not that much for her. I still did not offer. At month 4, they decided the 3rd-car garage bay should be converted into a mudroom with custom built-ins. $11,000 over budget. Holden called to ask if I could contribute since I had said I wanted to help them have a real home. I had not said that. I pointed that out. He said I was being technical. At month 6, Amber texted me. Not Holden. Amber asking if I could increase my contribution to the down payment because rates had shifted. I stared at that text for 10 minutes. Then I called my brother and told him clearly that I had co-signed the loan as a favor. I was not a funding source. I was not going to continue to be asked for money. If the house didn't work within their budget, they needed to make different choices. Amber did not forgive me for that phone call. I could feel it in every interaction after. The slightly shorter responses, the way she stopped sending me cheerful updates, the way Holden started sounding careful on the phone, like he was choosing words. But I thought the hard part was over. I thought I had drawn the line and we had all adjusted. I was wrong. The walkthrough happened on a Tuesday in October. The build was finally done. 14 months in, 3 significant overages that they had covered themselves after I stopped responding to budget expansion requests. I had taken a half-day off work to be there, which was not nothing. I had one of those shifts that physically hurt, and I had traded a weekend day to get that Tuesday free. The house was genuinely beautiful. I'll give them that. High ceilings, lots of light, that custom tile in the kitchen that I had not paid for. Standing in the main floor primary suite, I felt something close to pride. Not for myself, but the complicated kind you feel when something you helped build actually exists. We walked through room by room. The builder's rep, a man named Ted, had a clipboard and a checklist. Holden was taking video on his phone. Amber was filming too, already narrating for what I assumed was going to become some kind of home content. She kept saying things like, "And this is where the sectional will go, and we'll do a reading nook right here." We got to the basement, which was unfinished. They had chosen to leave it for later. Amber mentioned, while standing on the concrete floor in her white sneakers, that they were already looking at contractors for a full finish. Wet bar, home theater, guest suite. I made the mistake of saying mildly that was ambitious for year 1. She turned and looked at me and said, "Well, we can't all just be happy with a studio apartment, can we?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Holden said her name. She turned back to the unfinished wall and started pointing at something on Ted's clipboard, and the moment passed. I spent the rest of the walkthrough on the far side of whatever room we were in. We were outside afterward, in the driveway, in the sharp October cold. Ted had gone inside to get the final documents. Holden had gone back in with him. It was just me and Amber in the driveway, and I should have walked to my car. I knew I should have walked to my car. Instead, I said, quietly, that I didn't appreciate what she had said downstairs. She looked at me like I had said something genuinely confusing. "You're so sensitive," she said. "It was a joke. Then, this whole process, you've made everything harder than it needed to be. Holden would have had so much more support if you weren't so stingy with your own family." I said that I had co-signed a nearly $500,000 loan. She said, "And you act like that makes you a saint. You did the bare minimum." I don't fully remember what happened next in terms of exact sequence. I know I said something. I know she said something back. And I know she stepped toward me, not lunging, just closing distance in a way that felt aggressive. I stepped back. My heel caught the edge of the driveway where it met the lawn, which was frozen, and I went down. I put my hands out to catch myself and landed hard on my right wrist and forearm. Something cracked. I felt it before I understood it. I was on the ground when Holden came back outside. I looked up at him from the frozen grass. He looked at me. He looked at Amber. She said she slipped. He helped me to my feet. He asked if I was okay. I said I didn't think so. I thought something was wrong with my wrist. He looked at Amber again. She had her arms crossed and was looking at her phone. He said he would call me later to check in. Then they got in their car and drove away. I stood in the driveway of their brand new house in the October cold, holding my right arm against my chest. Ted came out and asked if I needed help. I said yes. He drove me to urgent care, which became the ER when the X-ray showed what the X-ray showed. Broken radius, partial tear in the soft tissue of the wrist, the kind of injury that, for someone who worked with their hands and was on their feet for 12-hour shifts, was not a small thing. My friend Renata met me at the hospital because she was the first person I called. She sat in the plastic chair next to my bed for 3 hours while they splinted me and processed my paperwork and gave me instructions I was barely hearing. She held my good hand. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Holden texted at 9:17 p.m. "Hey, heard the wrist was bad. Hope you feel okay. Just so you know, things are really tense with Amber right now because of today, so just give us some space for a bit." I read it twice. I want to be honest, for about 4 minutes, I felt nothing but a specific kind of shock that feels like cold water. The quiet, full-body shock of being told, while you are in a hospital bed with a broken arm, that the person who put you there needs space. Then I handed my phone to Renata and said, "Read this." She read it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. I thought about Mom's voice. I thought about the work boots I'd bought that he never thanked me for. I thought about my aunt being briefed. I thought about she slipped and the car that drove away. I said, "I want to make a phone call." My attorney, a woman I had been referred to 2 years before for an unrelated matter and kept in my contacts, answered on the second ring. I explained the situation briefly. She asked 2 clarifying questions. Then she told me what I needed to do and roughly how long it would take. The next morning, from my couch with my arms splinted to my elbow, I called Continental Title Group. I explained that I was the co-signer on loan file CT2291 and that I was formally requesting to withdraw. I explained that I had not received the closing disclosure, that the loan had not yet closed, and that I was rescinding my participation. They told me I would need to submit in writing. I had the letter written, signed with my good hand, and emailed within 40 minutes. I then composed a message to Holden. It was 4 sentences. "My wrist is broken. I've withdrawn as co-signer from the mortgage. You'll hear from Continental Title. Take care of yourself." I sent it. I put the phone down. Then I called Renata and asked her to bring me soup. She came over with soup and her husband and their dog, and we watched a movie, and nobody talked about Holden or Amber or the house, and it was the best evening I had had in months. The phone call started 2 days later. Holden called 6 times in one afternoon. I let them go to voicemail. The voicemails went from confused to urgent to angry in a progression that covered about 4 hours. Amber called from a number I didn't have saved, which I only know because Renata checked for me. My aunt called, the same aunt who had been briefed, and left a message about family being family. A week after I withdrew, I received formal notification that the loan had been denied without a qualified co-signer. A week after that, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they had lost their earnest money deposit, $28,000, because the contract had a financing contingency that required a co-signer, and they could not replace me in time. I will tell you honestly that I did not feel good about the $28,000. I want to be clear about that. I am not someone who finds satisfaction in other people losing money. But I also thought about the 9:17 p.m. text. I thought about she slipped. I thought about the car pulling out of the driveway. I felt mostly like a person who had finally put something down that had been very heavy. Amber was charged. Not with assault, the fall was technically ambiguous, my attorney told me, and I had no witnesses except Ted, who had been inside. But she was charged with harassment, following a series of messages she sent me in the 2 weeks after I withdrew, some of which crossed lines that my attorney identified quickly. I don't know the full outcome of that yet. I'm told these things move slowly. Holden and I have not spoken. I don't know if we will. I think about Mom sometimes and try to remember that her dying wish was for me to watch out for my brother, not to fund his life, not to absorb the behavior of whoever he chose, not to break my arm in a driveway and still be asked to give space. I think she would understand. I have to believe she would understand. The morning I got my splint off, 7 weeks after the walkthrough, Renata came with me to the appointment. Afterward, we went to this diner near the hospital that we've been going to since nursing school, Corner Booth. Same waitress who has worked there since 2019, the kind of place that feels like it exists slightly outside of time. We ordered eggs. The waitress asked about my arm. I said it was healing. It was a Tuesday. The restaurant was not busy. Outside the window, it was gray and starting to rain. And I had a cup of coffee that was actually hot, and Renata was telling me about something her neighbor had done with a leaf blower, and I was laughing before I even heard the punchline. I thought, this is the part that belongs to me. I had co-signed a loan because a dying woman asked me to take care of her son, and I loved her enough to carry that further than she probably meant. I had been generous to the point of my own harm, literally and otherwise. I had been called stingy by someone living in a house my credit helped build, and I had withdrawn, quietly, in writing, from my couch with my arm in a splint. The house is still there. Somebody else will buy it, or they will find another way, or they will. That is no longer a chapter I am in. I have a corner booth and hot coffee and a friend who came to the hospital at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday and held my hand without being asked. Some families are the ones you're born into. Some are the ones that show up. I know which kind is mine. I've thought a lot about what actually broke first. My wrist, or something quieter that had been cracking for years without me noticing. The wrist healed. 7 weeks in a splint, then physical therapy twice a week for a month after, and now it's mostly fine, a little stiff in cold weather. The other thing took longer, and I'm not sure I can tell you exactly when it finished healing, only that at some point I realized it had. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was 27 standing at my mother's bedside. Love is not the same thing as obligation, and obligation is not the same thing as loyalty. I confused all three for years. I thought that because I loved my mother, and because she asked me to watch out for Holden, I was obligated to fund his life indefinitely, and that refusing to do so would make me disloyal to her memory. That's a story I told myself. Amber and Holden told it to me too, and I kept accepting the telling. What I understand now is that every time I said yes when I should have said no, I wasn't being generous. I was being afraid. Afraid of my aunt's phone calls. Afraid of being the sister who didn't show up. Afraid of my mother's voice in my head asking if I had tried hard enough. That fear looked like love from the outside, and sometimes it felt like love from the inside, but it was fear. And fear is a terrible reason to co-sign a mortgage. The thing about Holden is that I don't think he's a bad person. I think he is someone who was handed a story about who I was, the capable one, the one with income, the one who would always come through. And he chose to believe it because it was convenient. Amber made it convenient. She turned my willingness into a resource and then resented me when I stopped being willing. That resentment, I think, was always going to find a way out. It found the driveway in October. What I learned from the driveway is this: the moment someone shows you who they are when they think there are no consequences, believe them completely. Amber said she slipped while I was on the frozen ground with a broken arm. That's the clearest sentence she ever said to me. I just had to be willing to hear it. And Holden drove away. He drove away and texted me that evening asking me to give them space. That text told me more about the last 4 years than anything else that had happened. Not because he was cruel. I don't think cruelty was the point. The point was that I had never really been a person to him in that dynamic. I had been a function, and when the function became inconvenient, he moved toward the person who was convenient. I withdrew as cosigner because it was the logical consequence of his own words. He told me to stay away. I said okay. I meant it in every direction. Renata came with soup. That's the part I think about most, actually. Not the loan denial, not the $28,000, not the phone calls I let go to voicemail. I think about Renata showing up at the hospital at 9 in the evening on a Tuesday because I called her. She didn't ask if it was a good time. She didn't calculate what it cost her. She just came. That's what it looks like when someone actually chooses you. There's no negotiation. There's no ledger. There's just a person in a plastic chair holding your hand while they set your arm. I spent 4 years trying to earn a version of that from people who were keeping score the whole time. I don't do that anymore. The house is still there on Clearwater Ridge, and someone else will buy it, and the upgraded kitchen and the 3-car garage and the unfinished basement will belong to people I don't know. That is exactly right. That house was never mine to give. What's mine is the corner booth, the hot coffee, the friend who shows up. I'll take it.